good to be able to come back. I've now gotten over here enough times I didn't even have to turn on the GPS. So, appreciate the opportunity to bring you another portion of God's Word. What I'm planning to do today is during class time, I want to deal with a story from, or actually a series of stories from the Old Testament, and then we are going to focus on one of the Psalms, Psalms 56, during the actual lesson time. It is very hard, or I should say very easy, maybe I should put it that way. It's really easy to read the stories of the Bible and not think about how the people felt. You know, you see the actions, you see what they did, but you don't really think about what was going through their mind. For example, take a look at Joshua 1. I'm going to do this the way I normally do it and ask for volunteers to read. So in Joshua chapter 1, would somebody read verse 2 and verse 9? How do you think Joshua felt? He was basically Moses' assistant for quite a few years, but then suddenly this young, relatively young man, 40-year-old probably, somewhere around that age, is suddenly put in charge of, about 2 million people? Yeah. Yeah, think about how you would feel. You'd be kind of anxious, you'd be nervous. Is it going to go right? Are they going to really listen to me? They weren't listening to Moses real well. And that's why you find God saying like 4 times. And if you count the end of Deuteronomy, it's like 5 or 6 times. You know, do not be afraid. Don't be anxious. I'll be with you. He's probably scared. Well, we don't typically think about it. We just think about him as being the war hero that goes through and conquers the land of Canaan. You don't think about him, his knees knocking while he's first getting up there to do all that. Take a look. Think about David. This 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 34 and 35. This is when David's talking to Saul about somebody needs to go out and fight Goliath. And he's talking about his background. So 1 Samuel 17, verses 34 and 35. Now, David's talking about his past, and he's, I don't know how old, a teenager, preteen. How many preteens or teenagers would, you know, you're watching the sheep and a lion takes one of the lambs, that you go up to the lion, grab him by the beard, and kill him. So what do you think, what kind of personality David has? He appears to be kind of fearless, yeah. He's not afraid to do what needs to be done, it seems like, at least. Take a look at verse 36 and 37. Need a volunteer. David's looking at it and saying, why isn't anybody fighting this Philistine? I'll do it. God was with me before, I'll do it again. And he's still a teenager as far as we know. Again, and then if you go to chapter 18, look at verses 5 through 7. Okay, again, I don't know if any years went by, but either he's late teens, he may be in his early 20s. How many people get put over a large section of troops? And not only that, he's successful. He's extremely successful. He's becoming a war hero. Okay, and at latest, he's probably in his early 20s. And yet he's quite successful. Eventually, David becomes king over all of Israel. But we also need to think about some of the things that David went through to get to that point. So we kind of get focused on how bold and courageous, fearless, maybe not in a good, well, in a good sense, but fearless that David is. But let's take a look at another event. In 1 Samuel 15, 26 to 29. So we're going back in time a little bit. Okay. Okay, so Saul, this is back when Saul was supposed to wipe out the Amalekites. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. Samuel confronts him, and he's told what? Your kingdom's going to be taken away from you, and what else? It's going to be given to someone else. It's going to be someone he knows, but he doesn't know who. But God says, I'm tearing it away. I'm going to take it away from you and give it to somebody else. Okay? That's what starts Saul down this road of basically losing his mind. Because he starts looking everywhere for who's this guy who's going to take my place. And how's it going to happen? And when is it going to happen? And then it wasn't long after that, that's chapter 15. Chapter 17 is when this young man comes out of basically nowhere as far as Saul's concerned, even though he was his musician, and kills the mighty Goliath. Okay? Just a mere youth. And then, as we already mentioned, Saul sets him up over his armies. And David's successful at leading it. This is not what you expect. You would think it would need somebody older. But this young man is being successful leading armies, and he's popular with the people. In fact, Saul begins to suspect he's too successful. In fact, even though we already read to 7, can we read 6 to 9 this time? So it's 1 Samuel 18, verses 6 through 9. Yeah. You notice that? What more could he have but the kingdom? Oh, yeah. That prophecy several years ago. And he starts keeping an eye on David. So in verse 10, somebody read 18:10 through 15. Yes. So, yes. Yeah, and the people see it that way. And okay, so verses 10 to 15. Okay, Saul now thinks, okay, it must be David. If, and it says an evil spirit from the Lord. I don't know why it says exactly from the Lord, other than maybe the Lord's encouraging it. But he's starting to go insane. And he decides he's going, and every time he's had these fits in the past, David would come in, play the harp, and that would calm Saul down. But the problem is, David's the one who's behind this particular fit. And so what does Saul try to do? Yeah, he threw his spear at him to pin him to the wall. Did you notice how many times? Twice. I don't know if I would stay in the room past the first one. But twice he threw it at David, and David finally escaped. Why do you think David stayed in the room? Yeah, he trusted God, and we already seen he's kind of fearless. But there's limits. And so he escapes, and Saul is just enraged. What does Saul do next? Which is it seems strange, but think about it. Yeah, so he puts him in charge of a unit, 1,000 men. And so he's basically promoted David from just a few hundred to 1,000. And what does David end up? What does he send him to do? Why do you think, if Saul is this mad at David, why did Saul promote David? He's hoping the Philistines will kill him. Here, I'm going to give him a task that's over his head so that he's just going to get swamped. He doesn't know what he's doing, and the Philistines will end up killing him. Very typical political move. I won't do it, somebody else will do it. And what ended up happening? David was really good at it. It didn't work the way Saul planned. This is really upsetting Saul now. It just seemed like I can't get rid of this guy. And he begins to suspect, well, God must have a hand in this. Okay, so look at verse 17 and verse 25. Okay. Saul's plot was, well, wait a minute. You know, back when David killed Goliath, I promised that whoever killed Goliath would get to marry my eldest daughter. And so he said, okay, I'll give you, the marriage. I won't even ask, I'm going to be generous. I won't even ask for a dowry. All you have to do is give me 100 foreskins from the Philistines. And what was he hoping would happen? Again, he's trying to get, this is getting really personal. This is up close personal. Somebody's bound to kill David now. And what ends up happening? Did we read verse 25? Oh, okay. I guess I skipped over that, but what ended up happening? Okay, why don't we read 27, 29? That's where I got, jumped ahead, I missed my note there. Okay. If you didn't catch that, back at 17, it's a different daughter. He was promised the older daughter. Saul goes and marries her. While he's off killing the Philistines, he marries her off to somebody else. He comes back, and David doesn't give him just 100 foreskins. He gives him 200. Oh, I'm going to have to keep my word. So here's my youngest daughter. And what really irritates Saul? Michal actually loved David. What worse can my own daughter's betraying me now? And she actually loves David, and so Saul's even more afraid. It's just everything he tries to do, David ends up succeeding. Okay? Yes. Yeah, now it's now think about it. You're working for a boss who absolutely hates you. And you're doing a wonderful job. And everybody else loves you, what you're doing. But your boss absolutely hates you. How would you feel? Well, actually, I think the hot coal one, that's out of Proverbs. I think the hot coal one's actually talking about smithing, blacksmithing. Yeah, Paul quotes Proverbs in Romans 12. Yeah, but I believe the illustration there is blacksmithing. What does a blacksmith do before he able to shape our iron? He has to heat it up by piling a hot. If you watch them, they pile a bunch of hot coals on top of the iron object to heat it up, and then it softens it enough that it can be bent. And I think that's the thing. How do you treat your enemies? Heap burning coals on their heads, soften them up with kindness, so that then you can then change them. But yes, that is what ought to be happening. It's not working on Saul. Okay, he's not softening. Okay. And so we get to chapter 19, and let's read verses 8 through 10. That's number 3. Third time. Charm. Didn't work. Threw a spear at David. This time he threw it so hard that what happened to the spear? It's stuck in the wall. I assume this is, since most of the stuff we find is made out of stone, I assume this was a stone wall. He threw that spear so hard, boing, it's sitting there, and David runs. Okay. Why did he throw the spear again at David? What got him so mad this time? He had a huge successful battle against the Philistines, and Saul can't stand that. He wants it the other way. He wants David to lose. He wants David to be killed. Okay. So what ends up happening is Saul decides that's enough. So verse 11 through 12, 11 and 12. Okay, so David goes home, and Saul ends up sending what? He set up men to surround the house so to keep eye on him, because in the morning Saul's planning to come kill him. Okay, so he's got David pinned in his own house. And he has people watching to make sure he doesn't escape in the night. And it's Michal, his daughter, is the one who intervenes and says, hey, if you don't get out of here tonight, you're going to be dead in the morning. And so she comes up with a clever plan to help him escape, lowers him down through a window, puts a image. Why there's an image in David's house is a good debate. But he puts an image of some sort in the bed, puts goat skin on top of it to make it look like probably hair, puts the bed covers up, and then when they come in the morning, David's not there. And so Saul ends up chasing him. Take a look at verses 19 to 24. Okay, so Saul's not going to give up that easy. David escapes in the middle of the night. He finds about it. Where does David go? He went to Sam. Why Samuel? Pardon? He was a man of God. Samuel had appointed him. He also had appointed Saul. Of all the people that Saul respected, it was Samuel. So in other words, David went where he thought was the safest place he could possibly go. This is probably your first hint. David's a little bit scared. Not, well, actually probably more than a little bit scared. So he goes running to where he thinks is the safest place he possibly can go, which is with Samuel. And so he goes to Ramah, which is Samuel's home, and then Samuel and he go off to Naioth, which is a neighboring town. Saul sends people to get David. What happens? Yeah, they go and they start prophesying. They get up to where Samuel is and they just sit down and start prophesying. And how many times does he do that? Do you think that you would get a hint by the third time that every time you send somebody, they sit down and they start prophesying? Yeah, yeah, maybe because he's not in his right mind. But he keeps going. And it's important because they're prophesying. That means who's behind this? It has to mean God. So Saul goes and does it himself. And I find it fascinating because he's already sent 3 sets of messengers. He knows exactly where Samuel's at and David. But he goes to Ramah and asks where Samuel's at. And they say, oh, he's over in Naioth. So he goes to Naioth. And what ends up happening to him? As soon as he gets inside of Samuel, he lays down on the road and starts prophesying, strips off all his clothes, and does it for a whole 24 hours, a day and a night. Does that stop him? When he starts realizing God's behind this? No. He gives up at that point. One of the things that also is pointed out is Jonathan and David have become best of friends. And again, this is something that Saul can't stand. All his kids like David. Jonathan's and David are very, 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 very close friends. They're best friends. And Jonathan just can't imagine that his dad is that crazy. And he's told that, David tells him, your dad's trying to kill me. And Jonathan just can't grasp that concept. So he goes to find out why Saul is trying to kill David. So 19, 30 to 34. Yes, it'll be 20. Slipping my fingers. I don't have a pen with me to change that. Yeah, 20, it should be 30, 30 to 34. all Jonathan did was say, "What's going on? Why are you so mad at David?" And what does Saul start doing? Yeah, he starts calling Jonathan names. And basically, the way it's worded is he's almost basically saying he's a son of a prostitute. And he says, you're dishonoring your own mom by supporting David. And he commands him to bring David to him so that he could kill him. And when Jonathan questions him and says, what has he done to be put to death? Saul does what? Throws his spear at him. Figured out Saul's favorite weapon. But he throws at his own son, the heir, from Saul's point of view. Heir of the throne. Because from Saul's point of view, the heir has given up his throne to David. And so he's no longer heir. And you could tell Jonathan just really didn't want to believe it, because it wasn't until his father tried to kill him that he finally said, I guess David's right. And he's furious. And so he leaves and refuses to eat. And goes and basically tells David, yeah, my father is trying to kill you. You need to run. So David's on the run. And where in Israel could he possibly hide? When you're trying to hide from the king, where can you go in that country to hide from the king? And so David, on the run, tries to find the place that Saul is least likely to look for him. And since David has been waging war against the Philistines, where does David go? Well, they went out to the field to get information. That's where he waited to find out about it. But no, what David decides to do is run to the Philistines. He goes to hide in Philistine territory. Saul's never going to look for him there, because Philistines are Saul's enemies. He can't get there. But David's, who would think to look for David in Philistine territory? But on the way, I want you to take notice of something in chapter 21. Chapter 21, verses 8 and 9. Okay. I want to point this out. Somebody else pointed this out to me just a little while ago, and I'm going, I missed that little fact until just this now. David's on the run. Of course, he fled out in the middle of the night. He didn't bring any food, and he had no weapons. And so when he stopped at the tabernacle and the priest decided to give him the showbread, which he shouldn't have had, but that was the only bread he had, so he gave David showbread. David asked, do you have any weapons with you? Because I ran without any weapons. And The priest said, the only thing that we have is what? Goliath's sword is wrapped up in some cloth behind the ephod. It technically is David's anyway, because David's the one who killed Goliath. So he said, it's basically, he says, it basically is yours anyway, so here, go take it. Did you notice the little statement that when David saw it, he said what about the sword? There is no other weapon like this one. I'll take it. And then he goes with the weapon that's easily identifiable as Goliath's sword, the hero of the Philistines, and tries to hide in Philistine territory. And that was a little thing I missed. Oh yeah, he's carrying Goliath's sword and it's easily identifiable. And he's trying to go in incognito, and it's not going to work real well. So verses 10 through 12. Yeah, I know this is a big, huge build-up, but I want you to notice what happens when he gets in Philistine territory. Pardon? Yeah. Achish is a king of Gath. Philistines are divided up into basically 5 princedoms, city-states. Gath is one of those city-states. And Achish, who's the king of Gath, his servants recognize David immediately. Tell Achish, David's here. And Achish has him arrested. And how, it just mentions real briefly, how does David feel? Oh, yeah, I missed that one, yes. No, he's not. Yeah. Well, it just because he's leading all the battles and he's winning them all. So probably from their point of view, he's king. Yeah. He's the biggest, he's the toughest, so he's not actually the biggest. He's actually a short man. But, he's the one everybody notices. So from their point of view, he's king. Yeah, I missed that. That's a good point. But how does David feel? He greatly feared. Everything is going wrong for David from his point of view. His boss is trying to kill him repeatedly. Nothing he does pleases him, no matter how good he does his job. People like him. His wife likes him. But otherwise, he's running for his life. And he thought he had a clever plan, but instead of God hiding him in the Philistine territories, he goes, as soon as he gets there, he gets arrested. And he's probably sitting in a dark dungeon someplace, waiting to appear before King Achish. Now we find out later he pretends to be insane, and Achish gets annoyed at the whole thing. But this is before that. This is while he's sitting in prison waiting to be brought before the king. And that's when Psalms 56 is written. And we're going to study Psalms 56 there in the lesson. Yeah, he has God, but at this moment in time, it almost looks like God's abandoned him. Yeah. And yes, he did flee with some young men. Because it mentions that when he went to get the bread, the showbread, that he had some young men with him. But whether he got separated from them or they arrested David and left them behind, yeah, he's alone. Any other points? They're all good points. I got to 20 after. Well, pause here, and then, or how far do you want? Long do you want me to go? Huh? Okay, we'll pause here. The lessons we're going to go.